in the nation's capital if you're involved in similar activity. For that reason, on a bipartisan basis, we support this simple but technically necessary fix, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Reserves the balance of his time. The gentlewoman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to have the distinguished representative, ELEANOR Holmes Norton, from the great District of Columbia, for 5 minutes.
Without objection, the gentlewoman from the District of Columbia is so recognized.
First, Mr. Speaker, may I thank the gentlewoman from California for her work on this bill and for managing this bill as well and explaining it to the House. I'm very grateful to the ranking member of the full committee for his work on this bill and his cooperation in helping us to move this bill forward. Mr. Speaker, this is nothing more, nothing less than a holdover from the old pre-Home Rule days of the District of Columbia. The Congress passed the Home Rule Act and intended that local laws would be a matter for the District of Columbia, and somehow this got left out of the mix, and the OPM, the Office of Personnel Management, and its counsel's office has been vexed, that's the only word for it, vexed by these complaints that sometimes come and sometimes don't. For example, advisory neighborhood commissioners, peculiar to the District of Columbia, are, quote, elected officials. They're unpaid. If you look at the council of the District of Columbia, almost all of them were advisory neighborhood commissioners. But somehow people bring complaints against them when they run for office because they're not regarded in federal law as elected officials. Well, they're elected officials, unpaid, but they are elected officials. They run for office. Those are not matters that you'd expect a federal regulatory agency to pay any attention to, and I don't want the OPM, in fact, spending the time of its special counsel on the arcane laws of the District of Columbia. And what this law says is you, D.C., will have to have your own Hatch Act. Hatch Act was one of the great reforms in government. Perhaps there's no reform ever in government that's been more important than the Hatch Act. This bill can't go into effect until the District of Columbia has its own Hatch Act for its own law, the way California and all the states of the Union have their own version of the Hatch Act. As I heard the ranking member say, when you're getting federal money and you're involved in federal matters, and often matters in the state are state and federal matters, Hatch Act applies as always. When you're dealing in D.C. with D.C. matters, you need your own Hatch Act, and you need to leave OPM to dealing with the more serious, often more serious matters that affect the federal government when millions of dollars may be involved in Hatch Act violations. I want to thank my good friends from California, both of them, for their work on this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The woman yields back the balance of her time. The gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time. And
the gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentlewoman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to urge my colleagues to support this much-needed measure, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman yields back the balance of her time, all time being yielded back. The question now is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1345? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California rise?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 2760.
Clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 2760, a bill to designate the facility of the United States Postal Service located at 1615 North Wilcox Avenue in Los Angeles, California, as the Johnny Grant Hollywood Post Office Building.
Pursuant to the rule, gentlewoman from California, Ms. Watson, and the gentleman from California, Mr. Issa, each will control 20 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Watson.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 2760, a bill which I introduced to designate a post office in my district as the Johnny Grant Hollywood Post Office Building. Johnny Grant and Hollywood are synonymous.